What's up, my wealth building moguls in myth the making? Welcome back to another episode of the Do Different Better show, where we talk about wealth, wisdom, and money moves, making finance simple for everyday people. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Social Impact Now, Connect Up Institute, and managing director of the Integrated Capital Fund. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the biggest myths out there, and that is you do not need a traditional mortgage to own property. There's so many creative financing opportunities that have come available, and I'm going to talk about them today. That's right. The 30-year mortgage is not the only way to secure real estate. And in some cases, it's really not even the best way. If you've ever thought, I want to invest in real estate, but I don't want to be tied down to a mortgage for the next three decades, this episode is for you. Now, let's be clear. Real estate is a powerful wealth building tool. But today, we're flipping the script on traditional homeownership and diving into creative ways to own, invest in property without taking on a conventional mortgage. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that nearly 30% of homes in the United States are owned mortgage-free? That's millions of people who have found ways to own property without taking on massive debt. So, how did they do it? Well, we're going to break that down today. First, let's unpack the myth of the 30-year mortgage, right? So, let's talk about why mortgages aren't the only path to ownership. When most people think of ownership, they think of banks and loans and a 30-year commitment, and that's quite normal. That's what we know from our parents and possibly our grandparents if we have that advantage. But really, but the reality is that a mortgage is just one financing method tool. It's not ownership itself. That's the debt piece. And you've heard me on previous episodes really talk about and really helping you really understand debt and the mechanisms of debt financing and what that means and what that looks like. But what if we stopped seeing home ownership as buying a house to live in and started seeing it as a strategic investment, right? That's what I'm asking you to consider today. So first, let's break down what the real cost of a mortgage is. What happens when you take out, let's say, a $400,000 mortgage at 6.5% interest rate? And that's actually pretty good right now. The interest rates are kind of hovering around 7 or 8. But for this example, we're going to talk about 400,000 at 6.5% interest. Over 30 years, you would be paying over $900,000. It's almost $1 million more than the original price because of the amount of interest that you're paying. And that's before you even factor in property taxes, maintenance, and insurance. There's nearly $1 million that could have been used to generate wealth somewhere else, whether it's investing in the stock market or investing in your own education or your own career, right? That's $1 million of interest that you're paying over the 30-year lifetime of a mortgage. So this is why it's really important. I'm not saying that getting a traditional 30-year mortgage is a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are other ways for you to think about, particularly if you're not interested in living in the home, but you want to acquire some kind of ownership. There are alternate ways to think about that, right? There's nothing wrong with a 30-year mortgage, but I just want you to think about it makes the most sense if you're actually going to be moving into the property, right? Okay. So now let's talk about the alternative ways to get into real estate without signing your life away to a bank. So we know this traditional way of thinking about renting versus owning, right? But even renting doesn't mean you can't invest in real estate. I did a whole show about people who are city dwellers who might be living in apartments and how they might be able to leverage their income of not having to pay a mortgage to actually leverage that into investing. So I definitely encourage you to check out that episode. But getting back to today's topic, renting doesn't mean you can't invest in real estate. It just means you have liquidity and flexibility that can be used to invest smarter. So remember what we talked about liquidity is how much cash you actually have on hand. And you might have more cash on hand without a mortgage. Particularly if you're a single person, you have no dependents that are relying on you, you have what is called an extra discretionary income. Those people who tend to not have children tend to have more discretionary income because they have less responsibilities that they're shelling out cash for. So I want you to consider this. Would you rather put all your money into a home you live in or use it to buy assets that can generate income? That's just a question. Once again, there is no judgment here. This is a safe zone, but just understand where, particularly if you're a young person, you may not want a house because you don't even know where you're going to be living. I think about my son who is pursuing a career in the medical field. He has no idea where he's going to be. So while he wants to make investments into real estate, it does not necessarily make sense for him to buy a mortgage or buy a home with a 30-year mortgage, and he's stuck. He has to deal with that property in a particular state that he may no longer be living in. So let's think about investing as a first approach, right? One, you can buy property for cash flow, not necessarily for your own comfort. Instead of focusing on your dream home, focus on income generating properties like small multifamily units, house hacking, and we'll dive into that in the next segment, or fractional ownership. So think about co-buying or real estate investment trust. And I'm going to talk about both of those. So one of the things that I really want you to think about is what makes sense for you. And so you've heard me talk about in previous episodes, you really got to get a clear path on like what's going on in your life, what might be going on in your life in the near future. And when I say near future, 3 to 5 years, right? You might be graduating college, or you might be planning for a child. Those are going to be things that have financial impact. And so when you're looking at possibly making an investment or even buying a home, you want to think about how might my financial life be changing due to different things that will be happening based on how old I am or the goals that I have, right? These are all really, really important things that you really want to think about. When I think about my son, who, while he was in the military, he was able to purchase a multifamily unit home. While he was able to do that, he actually was able to rent that out to one of his Army buddies, right? So this is one opportunity where he still lives at home with us, right? Which is fine, which is great. But at the same time, he now has a financial asset that has already, in the few years that he's owned it, has accrued equity in the property. So now he bought a house at a certain price. That house has now gone up in value in 30%, because of actually all of the development that's happening around his property. And he made some initial investments into the property to renovate it. Very small, marginal, but they were significant enough that he could demand more rent. So now he has a multifamily unit. He's collecting rent from 2 different units, and one of the units practically pays the entire mortgage. So the rent that he collects from the second unit, actually, he can just put into a bank account to save for if an emergency happens, either with himself or with the property. So these are the things when you think about, particularly if you're a young person, or maybe you're an older person and your kids have already left the house. This is a great opportunity for you to consider, well, how might you want to leverage all of your resources to actually start thinking about co-investing. I'm right now talking with a couple of colleagues of mine, of co-investing in a vacation property, right? So we're looking at co-investing our money. We don't plan on living there, but co-investing our money. She works for workshops. I'm going to start hosting workshops. We have another partner who also hosts workshops, and we're looking to buy a vacation home where we can host our workshops in this home. So it is now part of the business. So there's lots of different ways that you can start to think about how you might want to elevate or reimagine how you can think about ownership of real estate, or a home, or a vacation property, or even, I have a friend of mine, she She does have a timeshare, and I know timeshares get a bad rap. And I think that there is plenty of reason for that. But I also think that not all timeshares are built the same. She is a timeshare where she gets 5 trips a year that she can take anywhere around the world. And I was actually able to benefit from that. I wanted to take some time off and just run away. And so, because of her options, I was able to get basically what would have cost me probably $3,000 at an all resort community. I was able to get it for $800. Now, I don't necessarily, I don't have to pay her for that. I gave her the money to pay for the reservation, but outside of that, there was no cost to her. But she's getting the benefit of not only having this vacation opportunity, but also providing that to her close friends to be able to say, hey, if you need this, I don't need it right now. So why don't you go ahead and leverage this? So I just want to get your brain tickled a little bit about how you can think about different opportunities as it relates to thinking, decoupling home ownership, property ownership with actually home ownership, right? And your mortgage, which is typically tied to the place where you dwell, the place where you live, and being responsible for, being responsible for all the things that come with a home, especially if that's a home you're not going to be living in. Another mechanism it's been really it's been really popular, is just buying land, knowing that there is going to be an eventuality where somebody might want to acquire that land as part of a larger parcel, or somebody might want that land. You might want to build on that land in your retirement. So you buy the land, the taxes are relatively cheap, and you just hold on to it. Most of the time, through history, it is demonstrated that land, whether there's a dwelling on it or not, increases in value over time. So even though you're going to be having those what are called carrying costs, which is like the taxes and the insurance, you're going to have to pay that every year. You have this asset that has value for long-term use, or some use in the future, right? So here's my call to action for you, right? I really want you to challenge and rethink, why do you want to own property? Is it for stability? Is it for legacy? Is it for passive income? And we've talked about in previous episodes of like trying to get super, super clear on where you are in this moment and what can you actually take on, right? Physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, what does it look like? But also, what are you trying to do? If you want to buy a home and get a traditional mortgage, there's, once again, nothing wrong with that. And maybe investing is something you do in the future, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future. If that's what makes sense for your life right now, then that absolutely is what you should focus on. However, if you're in a different place, like I said, maybe you're an empty nester, maybe you have no dependents, you have fur babies, maybe you have, you are a young person and you're still living at home and you have a lot of discretionary income. Maybe that's the opportunity. I think of like, oh, what could it look like if I purchased some multi-purpose, or I'm sorry, a multi-family unit, or a small single family home? What could that look like if I purchased that? And would I be able to manage that financial responsibility? So here's something that you can start to do today. Start researching real estate. Lots of the websites are free. You can kind of see what's on the market, what are prices looking like. There are even calculators to tell you, hey, this is what you can presume what the mortgage would be, or what the monthly expense would be for this particular property. But start researching real estate markets where homes can be purchased without a mortgage, maybe a lower cost market or co-ownership. Lots of people are buying properties in other states, particularly states where the cost to purchase a property is significantly lower. I have a couple of friends, they've purchased property in other countries. There's a whole nother level of risk that comes with that. Obviously, you can't see it. You can't be there all the time if something happens, but there's mechanisms for that. But once again, if you're buying it and knowing, hey, in 20 years from now, I want to live in that country, hey, that's an opportunity for you, right? To be able to do that. So this is just the beginning, folks, okay? You're listening to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. In the next segment, we're going to be diving into how to own real estate without a mortgage, including co-ownership, house hacking, and lease options. You're not going to want to miss this. Don't forget, you can watch the show on YouTube at Do different, better, and I will see you after the break. Welcome back, my real estate renegades. If you're just tuning in, we're taking a deep dive into how to own property without a mortgage. That's right. No 30-year loan, no crushing debt, just smart investing. So in segment one, I talked about debunking the myth that a mortgage is the only way to own real estate. And I talked about why home ownership should be about strategic investing, not emotional spending. Now, let's roll up our sleeves and get into the how, the practical, creative strategies that let you secure real estate without borrowing hundreds of thousands of dollars from a bank. Whether you have some savings, a decent income, or you're just starting from scratch, there is a pathway for you. So let's get into it. Strategy number one, we're going to be talking about house hacking, right? So that is living for free while others pay your mortgage, right? So what if I told you you could own a property and someone else would pay for it? That's exactly what house hacking does. So let's really talk about what is house hacking. One is buying a multi-unit property like a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. You live in one of the units and you rent out the other units to other people, right? Or maybe it's you've got a spare room in your house. Maybe your kids have left or your family has left and you have some spare rooms. You could rent out those spare rooms in a single family home to offset your housing costs or your mortgage. The other is turning your basement or garage into a rental unit. If you live in the Bay Area or San Francisco area, this is a very common practice. I had a friend of mine who was renting out her garage, literally her garage, for like $800 a month, right? A garage, right? So somebody, and you can rent that out, obviously, if it's not legal for people to live there, that is not what you want to do. I do not want you get into any trouble, but there are people who they've got a band that they want to be able to rehearse. Maybe they're looking for just space for their stuff and they want it to be nearby where they live. And so you will be providing them a perfect opportunity by renting your garage to them. So I think I shared with you earlier about the story of my son. When he initially bought the multi-unit property he was living in, that he purchased, he was living on the top floor. His tenant was living on the bottom floor. His tenant was paying for 90% of his mortgage. So all he had to come up with was a couple of $100. He was going to school, so it worked out great. So he could go to school and know that his mortgage was paid for, right? But here's why it works. The rent from your tenant covers your mortgage or pretty darn close to it, right? Meanwhile, you're building equity in the property while keeping your living expenses very, very low, right? Finally, it becomes a launch pad for building long-term wealth because it's reducing your personal overhead while the actual value of the property is going up. So if you find yourself in a financial bind and you need to sell the property, more than likely you're going to sell the property for more than what you bought it for. And once that mortgage is paid up, you get to keep the balance, whatever is left over, right? Or you just keep holding on to the property and keep renting the property, and it just will continue to increase in value over time. And you can leverage the equity that you build in that property, maybe to go buy a business or maybe to go buy another property, right? So let me give you an example just to bring this all to real time. Let's say you buy a $300,000 duplex and you rent out one unit for $1,500. If your mortgage or financing alternative, and we're going to talk more about that later, is $2,000 a month, your rental income is already covering 75% of your housing cost, right? Look, you're building wealth while keeping your living expenses super, super low. It's a lot easier to come up with $500 than it is to come up with $2,000, right? So these are the ways that you want to think about what is your appetite? What can you actually do? And how are you going to actually manage it long term? These are all questions you want to be able to answer before diving in. I don't want you to just diving in cold like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to go out and buy a property tomorrow. there is some thinking that you want to think through so that you can manage. And as you go through the due diligence process or underwriting process, they will actually make you answer those questions that you've thought about some of these things, and you can actually manage it. But the thing that you really want to take away from all this is run the numbers and how much rent can you charge? What is the market rate for rent in that community? And can that actually cover most, if not all, of your living expenses, right? So just being very practical and tactical about that. Strategy number 2, co-ownership. You can partner to buy property without a mortgage. Okay. All right. So maybe house hacking isn't the thing for you, but what if you could own a property without going in alone? This is where co-ownership comes in. So first, let's talk about what is co-ownership. Co-ownership is teaming up with friends, family, or business partners to buy real estate together. Instead of taking out a massive mortgage alone, split the costs, responsibilities, and the profit of owning a property. So I shared with you before the break, me and a couple of my colleagues, we all run workshops. We haven't really been able to find a space that works for us. And we want to be able to have people stay overnight if they want when we're doing our workshops, or come the day before, rest before we get into the workshop the next day, including ourselves. So we're going in, but we're all going to be having our workshops at different times of the year. So for us to be able to go in and buy a property, that property now is a business expense, and we now, all three of us, have use of that property, right? It's great because I'm not having to go and buy a nearly $1 million property all by myself, and neither are they if we know that we're not going to be using it 100% of the time. And we've agreed whenever we are not using the property for one of our workshops, we're going to Airbnb the property. So the idea is that the property is always going to be making money at one point or another, either from our businesses, from doing our workshops, or from renting it as a vacation rental on the market, whether it's Vrbo or Airbnb, right? So let me get into the next level of nitty-gritty of how it works. You and your co-owners create a legal agreement that lays out who owns what percentage of the property, how the expenses will be shared, and an exit strategy, right? So this is no different than any other business. You want to outline all of the who, what, where, how, and why of your agreement. And I would encourage you, if you're going to do multiple properties, every property should be its own entity, right? The rule of thumb is real estate are built on an LLC structure. So every property should be its own LLC. And many people will say, hey, just name the LLC the property address. Just makes it easy. So when you're seeing what you own, you know exactly what you're talking about for that particular property. But let's get back into the legal pieces of it. So once again, you're going to want to know who is responsible, who owns what percentage. If you're putting in 50% of the down payment, is that equate to 50% ownership of this particular property? These are all things you're going to have to work out with your co-owners if you're going in with friends or family or business partners, right? But you outline all of that. But I'm going to give you a concrete example. Instead of struggling to buy a $400,000 house on your own, you and your three friends each contribute $50,000 to buy the property in cash and rent it out, right? Then everyone earns rental income while owning a piece of that appreciating asset, right? So, you know, and that $50,000 that you're each putting in, that collectively is $150,000. That includes the down payment for the house. So you can get 20, you're going to put down 20%, right? And 20% would be $100,000, but you also have an additional $50,000 of emergency money in case any repairs need to be made, any unexpected expenses need to be made, marketing needs to be done, pictures need to be taken, anything like that if you are going to turn it into a vacation property. Because everybody's putting in this, maybe you all decide that the ownership is 33, 33, 33 and a third, right? So, but it is super, super important, no matter what you decide to do, to always have legal contracts in place when co-owning property that isn't a handshake deal. I get into this particularly with partners all the time. One of the things when I'm talking with entrepreneurs, I ask them, I'm like, and their partners, I'm like, do you have an agreement? Do you have an agreement? And I would encourage even spousal partners to have an agreement that is specifically about the business. While yes, we want love to be forever, it isn't always that. So having an agreement with your spouse about that is informed by the laws of your state, and every state has different laws of what that looks like. Those should be reflected in your agreement with your partner if you're going into business together, right? So here's my action step. Look into co-ownership platforms like Picasso or Arrived Homes, which make it really easy to go and co-invest in properties, particularly vacation properties. Maybe start some conversations with some trusted friends or family members about the possibility of pooling resources to get to purchase a property. Okay, here's strategy number 3: lease options and seller financing. Okay, so maybe you don't have a team of partners or family or friends who maybe have access to capital, or they're just not interested in doing something like that with their resources at that time. But you're not necessarily ready to rent out the extra space you have in your home. What if you could own a home without getting a mortgage directly from the seller? This is where lease options and seller financing can come in. So first, let's talk about what is a lease option. It could be a rent-to-own agreement when you rent a home with a right to buy it at a later time at today's price, right? And you may have heard contract for deed. There's a few different other names for it, and there's different structures of how it can work. But what happens is a portion of the rent goes toward the down payment with no bank loan required up front, right? So how it works is you negotiate a lease with the owner where you pay monthly rent, but a portion of it is credited towards a future purchase, right? But you're locking in today's purchase price even if the home rises in value, right? So if you say, if you rent a home for $2,000 a month and $500 is going towards the down payment of each month, in 3 years, you would have $18,000 saved and you could buy the home without needing a bank loan up front, right? That's how it works. There's lots of nitty gritty. I'm oversimplifying this a lot, but the whole concept is that being able to negotiate, particularly if you've been a renter in a property for a long time, and if that owner is getting older, that might be something that they'd be amenable to. They don't necessarily want to go through the hassle of finding a realtor, making over the house, having, realtors walk through and all of that. So if you go to them and say, hey, you know what? We've been a tenant for 10 years. We are really interested in buying. You've talked about you want to move to Florida. Is there a deal to be struck here where that we could lock in a price today and we are going to pay extra on top of our rent that will go toward the down payment? Now, here's an important thing you need to know. The deal might be structured where if you miss a payment or you miss multiple payments, you are going to default on all the payments that you've made up until that point. So once again, these are things that you negotiate with the owner of the property, but there are repercussions, or there could be repercussions if for some reason you're unable to make those extra payments for a significant length of time, or you default on the rent altogether. You could default on any payments that you made and not get any of that money back. So those are things, once again, they're not automatic, they are negotiated, but you do have negotiating power to talk through those details with the particular owner. Now, let's switch gears and talk about seller financing. So seller financing, instead of getting a bank mortgage from the bank, you're going to make payments directly to the seller. This works well when a seller owns the house outright and is willing to offer flexible terms, right? So here's an example. A seller wants $250,000 for their property. Instead of paying a bank, you agree to pay the seller $2,000 a month for 10 years, no bank loan required. You and the seller negotiate the interest rate, the payment schedule, and the buyout options and default options of what happens if you default, right? So what's great about that is maybe your credit is not the best. And so but you're a good renter, you have good rental history, you've got good payment history, but your credit might be new, you might be a new American, you might not have built up, but that doesn't mean you're not credit worthy. You just may not be credit worthy to a traditional financial institution like a bank. But if you've got a good rapport with the seller, that might be something that they would be open to. So here's an action step. Search for rent-to-own homes or sellers open to financing on websites like Craigslist and Zillow's, Make Me Move listings, and local real estate investor meetups are also great places to start. They may have some off-market off-market places that listings that are people who are interested in maybe doing some alternative financing are outside the traditional financing options for their property for a variety of reasons. One of my family members, they were selling their cabin, and the person who was the person who lived on the cabin site lived next door. They wanted to purchase it, and so they asked for seller financing. They're like, "Hey, I just bought a home. I don't think that I could qualify for another big purchase because I just bought a property. I would like to work with you directly." And since we had a relationship, they had a relationship with this person over the last few years, they felt good about setting up seller financing terms. So once again, seller financing, you might want to do it with a stranger, but it certainly could work out better if you have some kind of pre-existing relationship with the person, right? And that goes for the buyer or for the seller. Okay. Whew, let's take a deep breath. We just went deep in how to own property without a mortgage, from house hacking to co-ownership to lease options. These aren't just theories. People are using these strategies every day to build wealth in real estate. So up next in the next segment, in the next segment, we're going to talk about how to scale your investments, on how to go from owning one property to multiple, and how to turn your real estate hustle into real financial freedom. So don't go anywhere, because if you thought this was good, it's about to get even better. Don't forget to watch the show on YouTube at do.different.better. I will see you in a minute. What's up, my wealth builders? Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. We have spent the last two segments talking about how to own property without a mortgage, from house hacking to co-ownership to creative financing. Now we're going to level up this whole conversation, because buying one property is great, but let's talk about how to scale your real estate investment and turn this into real generational wealth. If you're ready to go from one property to a portfolio, or if you want your first real estate move to be part of a bigger plan, this segment is for you. All right. Let's say you've used one of the strategies from segment 2 and now you own a property without a mortgage. What's the next move? Leverage it to buy more. But you're like, Elaine, but how do I do that? So let's think about this, how to use the rental income to expand. If your property is bringing in more income than the expenses, that extra cash flow can be saved towards your next purchase. For example, if your house hacking setup gives you an extra $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. That's enough for another down payment on another investment, right? Once again, we already talked about some other financing options, right? So you can do seller financing expansion. That's if you use seller financing for your first deal, you may be able to negotiate terms that let you put your first property up as leverage for the next property, right? With a co-ownership expansion, if you co-own a property, you and your partners can use the profits to reinvest together to get an additional property. Excuse me. So here's an example. You and your two partners co-own a duplex generating $3,000 a month in rental income. You each invest $500 a month into a savings pool together. In 2 years, you all would have $36,000 to buy a second property in cash or through some other alternative financing deal. Maybe you buy a distressed property. Maybe you buy a property at auction, right? Then you just have to worry about having the cash to do any modifications or upgrades that the property might need. But sometimes they don't need any. Sometimes they need a lot. So you want to be careful, right? This is where you want to build up your savings with these things, because you want to be able to have a rainy day fund, right? That means, hey, something happened with the roof, something happened with the water heater. I will just tell you, I just put in a new furnace. I will just tell you that was a big check I had to write. It was really painful. So you want to make sure you have reserves to handle any of those things, particularly if you're going to go into a co-ownership model or a partnership model. So here's something that you can do. start tracking how much cash flow or savings from your first property that you can start to put into your second investment. Or if you're renting out a room in your home, does the market allow for you to raise the amount that you are renting that room for? I have a friend of mine, she does Airbnb for international students. So what that allows her to do is she is collecting rent for her room. She's got different international students coming through her home about every 3 months. And so she gets to meet different people from different places. She's making a rental income. She could take all of that because her mortgage is paid off. If she really wanted to buy another property, she could do that. So here's step 2. All right, I know that some of you are thinking, I like real estate, but I don't want the headache of managing tenants. Say less. There are ways to scale your real estate investment without ever fixing a toilet, right? There is this opportunity called REIT, and REIT is an abbreviation. It's REIT. That stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. Okay. A real estate investment trust is like a stock that you invest in real estate, right? Instead of buying one property, you're investing in companies that own multiple properties like apartment buildings, hotels, or commercial spaces. What REITs do is they pay you a dividend, meaning passive income without managing tenants, or even, quite frankly, the property. The REIT, the people who are part of the REIT, the people who are paid administrative fees, they will manage all of those things, right? So here's an example. Instead of saving $10,000 for a down payment, you invest in a REIT with 8% annual returns. That $800 a year in passive income, that's $800 a year in passive income, all without dealing with landlords, mortgages, or maintenance, right? Then there's crowdfunded real estate. There are platforms like Fundrise, Arrived Homes, or Realty Mogul that let you invest in real estate deals with as little as $500. Instead of buying a whole building, you're buying shares in a property and you get a cut of the profits. Think about, we hear about this a lot in New York with co-ops, right? But even with those co-ops, those are people who are co-op, they're owners, but they live in the building. But there are co-ops where you don't necessarily have to live in the building, but you still get a piece of ownership that acts very similar like a stock. You're going to get a dividend, or you're going to get some kind of compensation as a result of rising rent prices, when the property sells, those kinds of financial events when those happen, right? So here's something you can do. Start to research REITs, remember REIT, REITs, and crowdfunding platforms, and see if this is an investment style that might work for you. I'm going to be posting on LinkedIn some articles about this, so definitely check me out on LinkedIn and you'll start to see some of those, and those might be able to answer some of your questions. Or feel free to just shoot me a question. If I don't know the answer, I will get you the answer. I have a very wide network. We can get you an answer, right? So here's step 3. Automating your income and building generational wealth. Okay, so you have got multiple properties or passive real estate investments, but the key is long-term success. This means automating your income streams. So number 1, set up systems to run your real estate like a business, right? Use property managers to handle tenant issues. Yes, it costs money, but it saves time. So just think about, what is your time worth? If you've got nothing going on and you don't mind answering all these calls, that's great. Some of us are still working a job while we're doing our real estate investing. So do you want to be getting calls at work? Do you have a job? Maybe you're a lawyer, or maybe you're a doctor or a nurse, and you are not always going to be available to step away from what you're doing. By having a property manager, they're going to take all of that off your hands. And so it could be worth your while to just pay that expense to know that everything is taken care of. You know, for me, when I first started, I managed all my properties, but then it got to a point where I just didn't want to be doing it anymore. And so I handed it over to a property manager. The other thing that you can do is automate rent collection. There are great platforms like Commercial Cafe, Cozy, Avail, to ensure consistent cash flow. Sometimes your property manager will have a platform that they use that they will have you put on. Some of the places where my office is, we're a tenant, and Everything is automated. I put in my maintenance request automatically on a platform. I pay my rent on the platform. I never really talk to a human. I don't think I've ever talked to my landlord, right? But these are different ways that you can start to automate managing your properties, whether they're co-ownership or not, to be able to make sure that things are just streamlined, right? But you can also use accounting software like Stessa to track income, expenses, and tax benefits, right? There's also Tenant Cloud. That's another great one that you can use. And I think it's like maybe $20 a month, right? Small cost to be able to know that everything is managed, and you now have a record, right? You can keep records. So you're going to put your tenants have to make their requests on this platform. You now have a record of things that you've done. And believe me, as somebody who's gone to court many times with people, with my tenants, not because I'm a bad landlord, they were bad tenants, but I've had to go to court. Having that record has made all the difference in the world. I've pretty much won every single case I had except for one. And the case that I didn't win, I only had to pay $1. That was, so once again, that was a signal to the judge that they were on my side, but for practical, for legal reasons, they sided with the tenant, but I only had to pay $1 in damages. So now let's talk about turning rental income into wealth, right? Reinvesting your profits. Use the profits from your first property to buy more. Just keep growing, right? But it may not happen right away, right? So my son, it was 3 years between his first property and now he's about to acquire his second property, right? So don't try to rush and think that it's going to just, I bought one, I want to turn around and buy another one. One that might not be good for you from just a capacity standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. So don't assume or don't plan that your next property is going to be bought in the next 30 days. Give yourself some breathing room, give yourself some time to be able to see what is it like, what kind of draw on your time and energy is managing property going to be, and then start to put the money away to get ready for your next property. So, next, pay yourself first. Set up automatic transfer to reinvest 20 to 30% of your rental income into new deals. So that's another great way to automate so you don't spend all the money right away. It goes into maybe a separate bank account, maybe it goes into a CD, whatever, where you can't touch the money, but it is available if you absolutely positively have to use it, right? Then finally, protect your assets. So use an LLC or a trust to safeguard your investments in the long term. Having an LLC, once again, gives you a little bit of legal protection in case you're sued. That's going to be really, really helpful as opposed to owning it personally outright. You are going to be personally responsible. Having an LLC, having it in a corporate structure helps with giving you some protections, right? So I'll give you an example. If you own 5 properties and each property is generating $1,000 of income, that's $5,000 of income a month, and that translates to $60,000 of income a year. Reinvesting just 30% of that, or $18,000, could annually fund another investment property every single year, right? So once again, you really got to kind of get a grip on understanding what are your goals, what is your financial tolerance, and what can you actually save, but also what is the expense of managing the property that you currently have, because no two properties are alike. And here's my final step. Create a long-term real estate wealth plan. Where do you want to be in 5 years? You know, I talked to my son, he's like, I want a portfolio of 10 properties. That's great. So what then is going to be the plan for that? But start making your money moves today. Even that may just start with just doing research, starting with the research, identifying what your goals are, identifying what you can, what you can't do, and what your risk tolerance is, and what your financial tolerance is. So with all of that being said, I'm going to bring this all to a close, right? So I just broke down the real estate hustle handbook, from owning a property without a mortgage to scaling it to long-term wealth, right? So whether you're house hacking, you're co-owning, you're investing in REITs, or you're building a rental empire, the key is to take action. Real estate is a wealth building machine if you use it strategically, and it does require planning. Do not take this lightly, right? This, I will tell you as somebody, I have so many lessons learned from my first properties. You know, I get asked all the time. I had 5 single family homes, and people often ask me, like, knowing what you know today, what would you tell your past self? And I would tell my past self, I would have, instead of buying single family homes, I would have bought multifamily properties, duplexes, triplexes, quads. And the reason is, when that single family house is empty, you are not collecting anything. You are just paying carrying costs, whether it's the mortgage, whether it's insurance, whether it's the water bill, the light bill, the lawn, the snow removal, whatever. So at least when you have a multi-unit or a multifamily property, if one unit is not rented, you're still collecting rent from the other units, right? So that's the biggest lesson that I learned. But once again, you may not be in a financial position to do that. Sometimes these small, like my son was looking at a property, it was a really small, I think 800 square foot little house, but it was like $150,000. Well, one, that is something that's attainable. And he's like, listen, it's just me. I want to rent the property while I'm in school. And I mean, I'm going to buy the property in school. I don't need a lot of house. And so this is perfect for me. Okay, that's a single family house. It works for him. It works for his goals. So this is why it's really important for you to have a clear line of sight on like what's important to you. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And what is the path after that? So you can make sure things fit together as possible. Obviously, life is going to be lifing and you may not be able to, it's not going to work out perfect. But if you go in with having a plan and a strategy, it makes it a lot easier. So once again, if this episode has got your wheels turning, I really want you to subscribe, leave a review, share it with somebody who needs to hear this message and they're looking to build a real estate empire. So I want you all to just really think about and leverage this as an opportunity. Real estate is a really great way, and co-ownership is an amazing way to increase your wealth without getting bogged down with a 30-year mortgage. So, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, I'm looking for you to do different better. I will see you all next time. If you loved today's episode, leave a review, subscribe, share it with another person who's really interested in real estate. And remember, you can watch the show on YouTube at do.different.better. I hope to see you. Let me know what you think of the show. We love comments. Tell us how this has helped you. Or if there's somebody you want me to interview, let me know. But I can't wait to see you next week when I show you how to do different better.